Coming up on Arirang News, preliminary figures show South Korea's economy shrank in the first quarter by 1.3% from the quarter before, the worst performance since 2008. President Jaein has accepted President Trump's invitation to join an expanded summit of the G7. It's a meeting that would make South Korea one of the leaders and shapers of the global order. And South Korea says it's reopening its case at the WTO against Japan's restrictions of key exports. Seoul says there's been no clear commitment from Tokyo to resolving the issues between the two sides. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea reported 38 new cases of COVID-19 on Tuesday, most of them linked to the recent cluster at churches in the Seoul area. The concern is that the church cases could lead to another big wave because the people at the church in Incheon, where the cluster spread from, did not wear masks to their services, leading to the infection of more than 70% of the worshipers there. Of the 24 people infected at that church, 17 had no symptoms. In this cluster, so far a total of 45 people have been infected at 23 churches in the metropolitan area. There was one additional death, bringing the death toll to 272. President Jaein says he will go to the G7 summit, his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump having invited him to join other world leaders there this fall. If South Korea is one of the 11 or more countries potentially attending, the Blue House says that'll raise the country's global standing. Kim Min-ji reports.
South Korea would become one of the countries that leads the world order should it become part of the so-called Group of 11. Seoul's top office said Tuesday that President Trump's offer to join the G7 meeting in September is not a one-time offer, but rather an invitation to join a new global system that would elevate the country's national status.
If a trip to the U.S. happens this year, South Korea will not be going to the G7 as an observer, but as an official member of a new international system. South Korea would become one of the leading countries that determine the global order. This will raise South Korea's national status and benefit the country's interests.
Trump officially invited President Moon in a phone call on Monday, reiterating that the G7 is outdated and doesn't represent the current international situation. The U.S. leader had earlier said that he was postponing the G7 summit until the fall and that he wanted to invite the leaders of South Korea, Australia, Russia, and India, expanding the G7 to a G11 or G12. Moon accepted the offer, saying that Seoul will fulfill its role in the areas of COVID-19 quarantine and economy. He agreed that the G7 has limitations in dealing with global issues and finding solutions. Moon added that if the expanded summit is held face-to-face, it would be a milestone in the COVID-19 crisis, signaling that the world is returning to a normal in terms of life and the economy. The top office, meanwhile, brushed off concerns about hurting relations with China, especially at a time when ties between Washington and Beijing have soured over COVID-19 in Hong Kong. A senior Blue House official told reporters that there was no mention of China during the talks, and instead highlighted Moon's remarks that the expanded summit would be a milestone for the post-virus era. Seoul's top office said that President Moon was the first leader from the 4 invited countries that Trump called, and that with South Korea's announcement, the expansion has become formal. It added that Moon said there was no reason to avoid the invite and that it was welcome news. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
The city of Seoul will be hosting the mayors of some 40 cities around the world tonight online for the 2020 Global Summit. They'll be discussing the creation of a global organization for cities and an information sharing platform for them. They'll also introduce a Seoul Declaration, stressing the importance of cooperation and solidarity in overcoming the global pandemic. The video conference starts at 10 p.m. Korea time and will be streamed live on the Seoul City government's YouTube channels and by Arirang TV, with simultaneous interpretation in English and Korean. South Korea's economy contracted in the first quarter of this year from the quarter before, and the second quarter will likely turn out a bit worse. Also, consumer prices were down last month. Yoon Jung-min reports.
South Korea has seen its economy shrink in the first quarter of this year amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The Bank of Korea announced on Tuesday that South Korea's preliminary real gross domestic product fell 1.3% on quarter from January to March. That's the lowest figure since the fourth quarter of 2008. The latest figure, however, is actually 0.1 percentage points higher than the BOK's earlier estimate. The manufacturing sector shrunk by 1%, while services contracted 2.4%. Private consumption plunged over 6%. The central bank expects an even larger contraction in the second quarter.
Considering today's first quarter growth of minus 1.3%, we expect growth for the second quarter to be a little worse than minus 2%.
Meanwhile, real gross national income shrunk by 0.8% on quarter during the first 3 months of the year. It seems COVID-19 has affected the country's overall economic growth in that period. The central bank also released data on the same day showing that gross national income per capita was tallied at $32,115 last year, down over 4% on year. That's actually the biggest decline in around a decade. The bank said it was mainly because of low growth and a weaker Korean won. South Korea's consumer price index was down 0.3% on year in May, posting the first negative growth in 8 months. Statistics Korea attributed the contraction to falling oil prices and lower public service costs. Petroleum product prices plunged over 18%, while industrial goods prices fell 2%. The price of agriculture and fishery products, however, went up by around 3%. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
In the second half of the year, the South Korean government plans to issue some $138 million in spending coupons to boost consumption. Officials say the coupons will be issued on a first-come, first-served basis and will cover 8 categories, including accommodation, travel, performances, movie tickets, and dining out. 1 million people who reserve accommodation online will get coupons worth around $33 each. And 6 million people who buy certain food products will get a 20% discount. The government expects the coupons will create economic effects worth around $736 million. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you as always for coming on.
Thank you for having me always.
Well, investors don't seem too worried about the tensions between the U.S. and China. Stocks on Wall Street up again. They're looking forward to the reopening of the economy. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, as you said, the Wall Street closed moderately in the green as the prospects of the reopening of the economy outweighed the civil unrest throughout the countries and the wave of the curfews. On Monday, the gains were led by the airline companies, the cruise lines, and hotels. So most of these companies were heavily hit from the COVID-19 because the states continue to lift the social distancing measures. Missouri allowed the casinos to reopen as scheduled, while Nevada is expected to do so on Thursday. However, though, if you look at the COVID-19 issues, it continues to rise at a heavy rate. If you look at the U.S., it's 1.7 million so far. Looking into tonight, it seems that the futures market continues to do strongly as the S&P 500 futures are up about 0.1% and NASDAQ futures are up about 0.29%. So clearly this is actually adding more boosting measures to most of other countries as well, with the dollar remaining quite weak, affecting money flows into the emerging market. And most of the emerging markets are showing a good trend of rise, as well as European markets showing quite strong move even today.
Well, now Korean stocks started out lower but quickly recovered, ending well in positive territory. Tell us about the action in the Korean markets.
Yes, as you said, Korean equity market started weak because of the concern about the U.S., but rebounded quite sharply, and it ended at 1.07% rise for Kospi and 1.07% rise for the Kosdaq as well. If you look at the rising trend, Kosdaq is the best performing index in the world, and the Kospi also doing quite well, recovering about 90% of the most of the fall that it has seen from the COVID-19. This is happening despite the concern about the economic weakness. As we look into the first quarter numbers in the March of 2020, the quarterly GDP declined Q-on-Q by 1.3%. However, though, I think that people are looking at that as a positive news because the South Korean economy advanced about 1.4% year-on-year numbers, while most of the other countries, including China and U.S., showed quite sharp drop in the year-on-year growth numbers. Also, people are quite positive about the liquidity condition. As you already know, that the BOK cut interest rate further. And also, we are hearing some positive government measures in regards to the equity market, in regards to the lower tax rates for the transaction cost. Also, they might be postponing the 1.3 million won, the limit in terms of the stock major shareholder in terms of tax payment. They might delay for another year for the end of next year. So if that's the case, all in all, it seems that the government is doing all possible to boost the Korean equity market in the future. So we think that this kind of trend can continue as long as the liquidity condition is positive.
Well, looking at the economy, according to statistics, Korea consumer prices fell in May. For the first time in 8 months, again, talk of deflation cropping up. What's happening with prices?
Yes. As you said, South Korea's consumer prices declined by about 0.3% year-on-year in May, from a 0.1% uptick that we saw in the previous month. And this number is actually lower than expected number of 0.2% drop by the consensus. It was the largest decline since September, mainly explained by the demand-side shocks that we saw because of this COVID-19 outbreak. Decline was mainly explained by the prices for the transport, down by 6.9% after falling 2.3% in April. Also, education prices fell 2.8%. And in contrast, prices for food and beverages climbed about 2.4%. On a monthly basis, consumer prices fell 0.2% after declining 0.6% in April, matching the expectations. All in all, price decline is happening because we are seeing continuation of the weakness due to the COVID-19. However, going forward, if the economy recovers in the third quarter, we think that price recovery can come through. Also, government is doing more aggressive measures to boost the economy. That could have positive implication for the consumer prices in the future.
All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks for your insights. We always appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, South Korea is going to reopen its complaint at the World Trade Organization over Japan's restrictions of key exports, a complaint it had suspended last November. The Trade Ministry said Tuesday that Japan has not shown a commitment to resolving the problems between the two countries, and that talks have not led to progress. Last July, Tokyo started to restrict its exports to South Korea of 3 key materials used for making computer chips and displays, in retaliation for the South Korean Supreme Court's ruling ordering a Japanese company to pay compensation to the Koreans it forced to work for it during World War II. Leading up to the decision to reopen the complaint, Seoul had called for joint efforts from Tokyo to resolve the trade row and overcome the economic fallout from COVID-19. But as of the end of May, Japan had not given a clear response. Through the WTO proceedings, the Trade Ministry said it will prove the illegality and injustice of Japan's export restrictions to the international community. Now, with international business and diplomacy starting to open back up, South Korea is issuing documents to as many as 550 people a day, certifying that they're free of the coronavirus so they can be admitted to certain countries that require certifications. According to an official at the Central Disaster Management Headquarters on Tuesday, the documents are being issued at 25 designated medical institutes, with more to be issued if demand increases. Back in March, there were just 300 such documents issued, rising to about 1,700 a month in April and May. The energy giant Qatar Petroleum has signed agreements with South Korea's big 3 shipyards to buy more than 100 ships in a deal worth more than $19 billion, the largest contract for LNG tankers in history. Industry sources say the 3 South Korean companies, Tues Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, Hyundai Heavy Industries and Samsung Heavy Industries will build around 40 ships each by 2027. It's a welcome shot in the arm for the big 3, all of which have faced restructuring in the past several years. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.